Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar discussion about the 2024 NADTC Planning Grant. We're so pleased to have you here. I'm Virginia Dyes. I'm one of the co-directors of the NADTC, and I will be letting you know who all from our NADTC staff is on the call in just a few minutes. We're really pleased to have you. We know that we've got a whole bunch of interested applicants on the call, and we appreciate your interest. Today, we're going to be walking through the RFP. So if you've got the RFP in front of you, so much the better. But we are going to be talking about eligibility, grant objectives, and a lot more. Next slide. But first of all, a little housekeeping. Just to let you know how this particular Zoom webinar is going to work. So all participants are muted. The session is being recorded, and all materials, including the recording of this call, will be posted on the website. The website is already pretty rich in terms of having a number of FAQs and background materials, etc. So we urge you to keep going back and forth to the website to make sure you've got all the latest info. Closed captioning is available. You can turn on captioning or subtitles on or off by clicking on the closed caption icon. So please do so if that helps. And please click the Q&A icon to submit your questions. We are not using the chat for discussion or questions today, so please use the Q&A button. And there will be an opportunity to verbally ask questions, and we'll explain that process a little later in the call. As I said, we're recording today's section, and I think that's all the instructions I need to give you, so we can move to the next slide, which is our introduction. So the slide after this is going to walk us through very quickly some information on the NADTC. We will also, as I said earlier, review grant eligibility, requirements, and deliverables. We're going to introduce the application portal and application requirements. I know that quite a number of you have already registered on the portal, so congratulations on meeting that milestone. And finally, we expect to have plenty of time to answer your questions, but please know if we don't get to your question, we will ensure that you get an answer. Next slide. So I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the NADTC, but just to review, we are a partnership. We've been here since 2016, and we are a partnership of US Aging, where I work, and Easter Seals, where Carrie Diamond, our co-director, works. We have been in existence quite a while now. Our focus is always on promoting the availability of accessible transportation that serves the needs of older adults, people with disabilities, caregivers, and communities. We do a lot of technical assistance, we do training, we have a robust communications and outreach effort using our website and social media. We believe very strongly and practice coordination and partnership. And we invest in community solutions. That is, we are investing in this community solution. And we believe very strongly in our grant work. It's truly my favorite part of this job, even though I'm no longer as directly involved as I used to be. I also want to ensure that you know who all is on the call today from the NADTC. So I mentioned Carrie, my counterpart at Easter Seals. We also have Melissa Gray, Assistant Director of Transportation with the NADTC, and Meredith Bratton, who's a Program Associate with NADTC. Melissa, Meredith, and I work at US Aging, and Meredith is the honcho on the SM Apply system. And she also is the person who receives all the questions that come in on the call. It's not that on the grant, not that she answers every one of them without consulting with somebody else, but nevertheless, she's the point person. And then finally, but certainly not least, Jane Mahoney, who's a technical assistance and information specialist with the NADTC. She works at Easter Seals, and she and I are going to be co-presenting today.
And Eileen Schroff.
Oh, you know what? My mistake. Eileen was supposed to do this presentation, but she is not feeling well today and has a bad cold. So I'm doing the speaking part. So Eileen, forgive me. And Eileen Schroff is going to be answering questions in the Q&A today. Hopefully all of my colleagues will ensure that I don't forget anything important. Thank you, Carrie. Next slide. So what does the grant look like? This is meant to be a high-level review of the grant. And we've received a number of questions since we released the RFP. So please remember a couple things. One is that this is a planning grant, and it is an opportunity for applicants to develop the grants that we award to develop a transportation plan. And it's targeted to rural areas, particularly rural and tribal areas around the country. Next slide. So eligibility, who can apply? Non-government, nonprofit or government organizations, but not for-profit organizations. Just be aware, if you are a for-profit organization, you can certainly be a partner in this grant, but you may not be the primary grantee. That's the way this is set up. This is funded by the Federal Transit Administration, and they have approved our eligibility requirements. As I said earlier, it's targeted to rural and tribal areas. Projects must serve a rural area, and by that we mean the definition that FTA uses, which is a population of less than 50,000. But I want to say that rural areas, you can apply if you are a regional area and you include a rural area in your jurisdiction. However, the benefits of this grant, the planning process, all of the activities have to take place in a rural or tribal area that pretty well follows this definition of 50,000. It's very important, especially if your mailing address is in a city or town, and you serve a fairly large rural area that may include a small city as well as suburban areas, that you're very clear about where this grant is going to be housed, where the activities are going to happen, and the particular community that is going to benefit from this grant. Prior NADTC grantees can apply except for the recipients of the 2021-22 grants. Those grantees also had a planning component, and then they moved on to the implementation component. So for that reason, and they are our most recent round of grantees, those folks may not apply. And finally, recipients of 5310 funding are very much encouraged to apply. and or participate as a partner in this grant effort. Next slide. So the grant requirements. First of all, this is a planning grant, as I said earlier, and I also want to emphasize it's an inclusive planning grant. And what that means is that the grantee organization is expected to work with important people in the community. That is critical partners, multi-sector partners that come from aging, transportation, disability, and other interest groups that really need to, will be affected by the plan that you all come up with, and hopefully the implementation that you later on are able to carry out. But also equally important are riders as well as non-riders, people who use your system, your services now, if you're currently a transportation provider, as well as people who could benefit from your services. So this is really meant to be a community-wide effort that results in this plan, and that will be able to support it going forward. Data collection and analyzation are also critical activities that you are encouraged to address as you put together this application. Whatever data you've got on the area that you're going to serve is really important. Whether you're using a recent survey that you've had done in your community or census data or whatever. These are activities that are going to happen during this grant, but it's also really good as you put together this application to share data and what you already know about the community, including rider data. As I said earlier, it's a multi-sector collaboration. One entity cannot, in my opinion, create a really good, robust transportation program. You must have community engagement. And since our focus is on serving older adults and people with disabilities, people who are from underserved communities, it's really, really critically important to have all the right players at the table. And that's what's meant by this multi-sector collaboration. Coordination with existing plans and planning efforts. If there's I'm assuming in your community, there's a human service public transit planning process that goes on. There also are planning processes that go on within the aging network, within the disability network. There's a lot of planning going on. So to the extent possible, it's really important to think about all the other planning that's going on and how can the plan that gets developed from this project complement and enhance and support other plans that already exist. We do expect at the end of these projects that a plan of action will be developed, and one that your multi-sector collaborative partners, including riders and potential riders, will actually be able to support. And finally, travel to Washington, D.C. for training is a requirement of this grant and should be reflected in your budget. Next slide. So grant deliverables include, and some of these deliverables are going to be due at different parts of the actual implementation of this planning grant. First of all, a roster of advisory committee members. You're expected to include who your primary partners are as part of your application, but also we know from experience, advisory committees are evolutionary creatures. That is, start with a core, your basic group of partners that absolutely need to be there, as well as some representative riders and potential riders. But also recognize that during the life of this grant, your advisory committee may grow a little bit. Or you may discover that a particular entity or organization or person really needs to be at the table. So that's fine. We recognize that. A summary of findings from your engagement. So whether you're doing focus groups or doing a survey and so forth and so on, one of the things that you're going to need to be able to deliver is who have you reached out to and what have they been able to say? And how have you engaged them in this overall planning process? And finally, a written plan of action is the ultimate end of this planning grant. The solutions that have been identified, a framework for how you would go about implementing the priority areas that have emerged, and strategies that you have come up with and that your group of advisors have helped you come up with in terms of how you're going to build support going forth. Very, very important. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jane.
Thanks, Virginia. Meredith, I think we are on slide 10, the application, because I think Virginia went over that. Yeah, so hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking about the different requirements for applying for the grant, and we can move right on to slide 11. I wanted to include slide 10 so you could see the nice picture we have. These are all images from our photo gallery that are on our website. So anyway, the applications will all be submitted through the SM Apply portal. And there's a link on our website to access that portal. And we aren't going to be accepting any emailed or snail mailed applications. And all the applications are due by Friday, June 7th at midnight Eastern time. Before submitting an application, you really need to be registered with the SM Apply system. So if you have previously used SM Apply for one of our grants or another reason, you'll be able to log in using your existing account and password. And if needed, you can use the forgot password to get logged in. If you haven't used the SM Apply system before, you'll need to register. And we have some really great instructions on our website for how to register in SM Apply. And there is also now a video up of those instructions. So once you have registered, then you can use those same instructions to get started on the entire application process. And again, it's a nice step-by-step guide through the SM Apply system. We suggest you get your account created soon so that you can troubleshoot any issues that might arise well before the deadline. And also, if you have any questions about SM Apply in the application, you can email them to the NADTC grant at nadtc.org email address, or you can use our toll-free number 866-983-3222. Next slide. Now I'm just going to go over some of the steps of the application. So after you're registered, you'll be able to access the application, and the first section is just some basic information that you'll be able to fill out. And then the next, it'll move you right into our narrative questions. So the first narrative question is just a project summary, and you'll have 100 words to describe a summary of what you plan to do. The second narrative question is around community need. So we're going to be looking for the current conditions of the community assets and needs, and then efforts that have been worked on, and then how you plan, how you've been using funds. Particularly, we're interested in learning about how 5310 funds have been used in your community. And you will have 350 words to describe your community need to answer question 2. Question 3 is around the planning process. So here we are looking for how you plan to collect data and how you plan to do your work. We're going to have you include the methods that you want to use to engage your target population. And as I said, how you're going to collect data, and then also include any other planning efforts or conditions that are going to be supporting your work. And in this section, you'll have 350 words. Number 4 is anticipated outcomes. So we'll have you describe what you think a potential solution could achieve in the community. You'll include anticipated outcomes and impacts of the planning project on the target population. And here you'll have 300 words. And then the 5th narrative question is around a demonstration of capacity. And this has multiple sections, and each section has a different word count. But the first part is listing all of the committed multi-sector project partners that you will intend to engage with. So the different agencies and organizations. And then you can describe the different assets and advantages that each of those organizations, those partners, will bring to the table. A note here is about the letters of commitment. 3 letters of commitment from 3 of the project partners will be part of this section. And I'll talk about those in a little bit. And then another part of the demonstration of capacity is just explaining your organization's ability to manage and complete the planning grant. If you plan to use any consultants, this is where you would talk about them. It's okay to use consultants, but we would like to, a description of the work that they'll be doing. All of the questions are spelled out in the RFP, and so I really suggest that you look through those, and you might want to answer those questions in a Word document. It's an easy place to check your word count, and then when you get into the system, you can just copy paste the answers right into there. Next slide. The next section of the application is your work plan. So when you're in SM Apply, you will see that there's a work plan template that's been uploaded. So you'll download that template, and then you develop your work plan within that template, and then you'll upload it back into SM Apply. And we have detailed instructions again on how to do all of that. We have on our website a work plan tips document, and you can use that to help develop your work plan. We also suggest that you look at the grant requirements to give you an idea of all of the different things that should be included in your work plan. This is where you'll be able to show how you're meeting all of the grant requirements. Just a note too, that if your application is selected and you will be a grantee, you will have an opportunity to refine that work plan, and you'll be assigned an NADTC grant manager to help you do that. So you want to be thorough on your work plan, but also know that you will be able to have an opportunity to refine that if you are chosen. Next slide. Moving on down the list, we will do the budget next. So in a similar way, there's a budget form uploaded into SM Apply that you will download, and then use that form to create your budget. And then again, upload it back into SM Apply. Grant funds, as Virginia mentioned, can only be used for planning activities. So no purchasing of vehicles or paying for rides with this grant. You'll be paying for expenses that are related to community engagement activities, doing surveys and focus groups and community meetings, things like that. Also staff time to carry out the pieces of the grant. So we have a sample budget that is also on our website that you can look at, and you'll get an idea of what a budget might look like. On the second page of that sample budget, you'll have an explanation of each of the different categories. So those will be helpful tools in determining what you can include and should include in your budget. Note that you cannot change or add any budget categories. You need to use the ones that are there, but that you do not need to use every category. Match is not a requirement of this grant, but you can add it if you wish. Also like to just let people know that everything on your budget form will need backup. So think about that. And then also a good tip is, as you're developing your budget, to look through your work plan and then look at each of the tasks that you want to do, and then make sure that those are all accounted for on your budget. And one last bit about staff time. Yes, you can include staff, and in fact, we encourage you to include enough staff time in your budget. Grants take time, completing good work takes time, and we recognize that. So don't underestimate how much time it's going to take. You'll be spending time doing fiscal management, time spent meeting with your NADTC grant manager. There'll be meetings where you'll gather with the other grantees as well. So those meetings all take time. And then, of course, you have the work of the grant, meeting with your partners and completing the different engagement activities you have. So consider all of those different aspects as you are determining how much staff time you need to allow for the grant budget. And we'll go on to the next slide. As mentioned, you do need to provide 3 letters of commitment as part of this grant. And as Virginia was saying, these multi-sector collaborations are very important and an important requirement of our grant. So these are really important letters. These are not letters of support, they're letters of commitment. So we are looking for partners that are not just cheering you on and saying, yeah, we like your work, but we're looking for partners that are going to be participating in some way. So that should be clear in those letters. We don't want the letters to look like form letters that were just signed, but that they're each individual letters that where the partner is able to describe what they intend to bring to the grant project. You will get those letters and save them on your computer and then upload them as indicated into SM Apply. In question 5, I mentioned a little bit in that demonstration of capacity is an area that you'll be able to expand on the different types of assets and advantages all of your community partners have. So you can add information there. If you have more than 3 partners, that would be the place to put those in. And I think I will turn this back over to you now, Virginia.
Okay. So now we're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about dates, review processes, and selection criteria. So next slide. So reminder, applications are due June 7th. Please don't miss that application deadline if you really want to apply, because later will not be accepted. The review process has a number of different components. It includes internal eligibility confirmation. The SM Apply system has a way of ensuring, for example, that you don't exceed the word count. And it notes when the application is fully submitted. So a lot of those criteria, those basic expectations of this grant will be done within the SM Apply system as long as you follow the directions to submit your application. It also, after the grant is awarded, we expect about 9 months of planning activities. We also have a panel of independent reviewers who will look at the grant. And this is one of the things that you need to be aware of. We do use independent reviewers. We do rely on their independent recommendations to build a slate of recommended grantees that we then prepare and send on to the Federal Transit Administration. And so this whole review process and approval can take time. We act as expeditiously as we possibly can, but we understand that sometimes applicants expect to have heard by now and they haven't heard. And very often it's because some part of the review process has slowed down, and we haven't been able to move the application through the process as quickly as possible. We do not share preliminary information and say, well, we haven't selected you. You will get written confirmation of our decision. So just be aware of that. We have gotten some questions from people related to the review. People want to know, and I understand this completely. When do you expect to start these grants? I can only say that because of the nature of the review process and because there are so many players that have to be involved in this process, FTA does approve these grants right at the outset. They're very interested in our grants, which I think is a really good thing, but it can slow things down a little. So it's really, really, really important to understand that we can't give you a date. We can't even give you a month. But at the point that we can share this information, we will do so as quickly as possible and start the actual grant implementation as quickly as possible. When will the grant funding be distributed? This is a reimbursement grant, and what that means is we have a monthly reporting process. When you turn in your report on the first month, we will pay you the invoice that you submit to us, and with backup. Based on the funding categories, we have created a funding form that will follow the categories that's in your budget. So it is really, really important that you submit that with adequate documentation, and then we can quickly move ahead and get you into our payment system and pay you promptly. So a lot of every month you submit a report, every month you can be paid. So just be aware of that. I do want to remind you that this use of independent reviewers, one of the things that Jane emphasized was that these letters are not letters of support. They will be looked at critically. So ensure that your letters really do talk about how these partners that submit the letters are going to be involved in your project. Next slide. So the narrative questions and the review process are coordinated so that community need is one of the questions, and that gets scored separately. The planning process, the demonstration of capacity, the anticipated outcomes, and the work plan. These are the elements of the application that you submit that will be scored, reviewed and scored by the independent review panel. And these are the scores that really are highly determinative in terms of what grants we fund. Next slide. But there are other things that we do take into consideration when we select a group of grantees. We are looking for some geographic diversity. These are rural and tribal grantees, but nevertheless, we don't want them all to be in the same place. A mix of organizations. So we may find some organizations that are public transit agencies or other transportation providers. Other organizations that we can find include educational institutions, area agencies on aging, centers for independent living, community action agencies, a real mix of organizations. We also are looking for some diversity in the type of project, some challenge addressed that isn't all the same challenge with the same approach. So we are looking for some differences among the grantees. There'll be some similarities among grantees as well. And then if we see an opportunity for something that could turn into a model solution in the future, if we see that reflected in your grant application, we're going to be very interested, and that can be a plus. So all of these things, in addition to the criteria that is laid out very carefully in the RFP, are given some consideration in terms of the slate of grants that we select for funding. So I'm going back to Jane.
Thanks, Virginia. So we just have one little section left here on project launch, and then we'll get into our questions. So go ahead to the next slide. And I think Virginia pretty much covered this, that all of the applicants will be notified after FTA approval. And at that point, the awarded grantees will begin the contracting process. And that can take a little bit of time. We try to get through these things as quickly as possible, but we do like to wait until all contracts are completely finalized before we begin the grant work. And again, the duration is approximately 9 months. Next slide. And I think Virginia covered this pretty much too. Our grants operate on a reimbursement basis. So you'll be spending your money per the budget that we've worked on together and approved, and then submit a monthly financial report that requests reimbursement. And you will need to provide backup documentation for all of the spending. And you will be assigned an NADTC grant manager to work closely with you to help you get through the paperwork and make sure it's everything is meeting the requirements. Next slide, and we're going to be talking and getting into the questions here. So we already have on our website a frequently asked questions page, and we have been updating that regularly as we've been receiving questions via email. Throughout the webinar today, you'll be able to ask questions, but afterwards you can continue to contact us at our NADTC grant email address with any other questions or call our toll-free number. So go to the final slide, and we are going to start working on our questions. I see there have been several that have come into the Q&A. If you haven't yet done that, you can feel free to submit a written question by clicking on the Q&A icon and typing in your question. If you would prefer to ask a verbal question, you can click the raise hand icon, and then we'll get call on you and unmute you to ask a question verbally. We did have some questions that were pre-submitted, so I'm going to just go through those quickly, and then we'll get to the ones from today. I think many of these may have been addressed, but the first one was about partnership. Does the lead applicant have to partner with an existing transportation entity? And yes, the existing transportation in the community should be involved in the grant project. And it's important to note that if the applicant is not the 5310 provider in the community, that a letter of commitment should be included from the 53 provider indicating their willingness to participate. Next, we received a few questions about eligible expenses under this funding, as well as expense reimbursement. And again, I think we pretty much covered that, but the question was, can we use this funding to reimburse expenses that have already been incurred related to transportation planning and coordination? And that's no. You will submit a budget as part of your application and then work with the grant manager to finalize the budget and then spend money as designated in that budget. And the other one was about, can we use the funds to purchase buses or accessible vehicles, or, oops, I just lost it, to provide rides to medical appointments? And no, as indicated before, this is a planning grant. All the activities must be related to the planning process. So you cannot use the funds to purchase vehicles or rides. The only rides you could pay for would be, we would support rides for community members to attend planning events, planning activities, like attending a community forum. But those would be indicated in your budget. We received several questions around rural community eligibility, and we want to reiterate that we are using the FTA definition of rural, but a regional organization located outside of a rural area can be the applicant for these grant funds if the project will focus on an eligible rural area. And you have an opportunity in the questions to describe your community in the selected geographic area of focus in this project. So that would be in question, in one of the questions, I think it's question 6. And then we received a question asking if there's a set number of years that you need to be in business before you can apply for the grant. No, there is not a requirement for the number of years you need to be in business. However, you will be asked to describe your organization's capacity to manage and complete this grant, and that's in question 5 of the narrative section. So here you have an opportunity to describe any previous grant management experience or experience with inclusive planning and working with older adults and people with disabilities that would demonstrate your ability to manage the grant. I think we'll go into the questions in the chat, and Virginia, I'll probably read most of these and have you answer. If you want to come back on camera, that'd be great. So the first question we have is to clarify, a town or a small village that is well below 50,000 can apply even if regional, if regional, they are considered to be a metro area. I'm referring to Long Island, New York, if you're familiar.
I think that's sort of a tough question, because I think most of us think of Long Island as being fairly suburban, but then again, I don't know Long Island like you do. So I would say, you might want to contact us and talk about exactly what area of Long Island you plan, to cover, and your evidence for, it being rural. So I would suggest a phone call. And so leave a message on our toll-free line, and someone will get back to you and we'll have a conversation about it, because it sounds a little different. And I know that things can be different, but it's better to be safe than sorry.
Thank you, Virginia. The next one says, as a CAA, and I believe that's a community action agency, can we apply on our own behalf? The second paragraph on page 3 is confusing. I would say yes, Virginia, unless you have a different.
No, that's the answer, Jane. Thanks.
The next one says, on page 11, says applications focus on both older adults and people with disabilities residing in the targeted area. Does this mean any disabled person, any age, or older adults with disabilities? And I think I can safely answer that would be disabled people any age.
Yes.
Okay, the next one is, would using this grant to fund an SROI, social return on investment, be an acceptable use?
I'm not exactly sure what that question means. I think that could be a purpose of the grant, but this has to be a community facing grant that is going to be developing a program that ultimately is going to benefit people living in the community. So if you justify that, I don't care what, whether you label it a social return on investment or something else, but that really is the intent here, that these planning grants are intended to positively impact a community and the older adults and people with disabilities who live in that community. Carrie, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I would just add that if this is just done as seeing how well your service is doing right now, that it would not be. If this was a tool used as kind of assessment purposes to plan additional services or ways in which you're augmenting services to older adults and people with disabilities, it could be, but your work plan is going to have to go into what comes out of that, not just what is that social return on investment.
Thanks.
Thanks. The next question is, do you have examples of previous successful applications? We have examples of successful grant projects, and those are on our website. So I'm thinking you're looking for actual applications, and I don't believe we would have any of those available for people to look at.
No.
Is there an expected time frame that the planning process will occur? Could it take place as late as 2026? No, it won't take place as late as 2026, but go ahead, Virginia.
No, I was just saying it's approximately 9 months. We anticipate that by the fall we'll be started. But beyond that, and the fall is 3 months long, remember, beyond that, I can't commit to exactly when these grants start. So we're talking about grants that go into 2025, but not into 2026.
Very good. On page 8, what is meant by geographic diversity as a criteria for consideration of funding? And I think Virginia answered that. We are not wanting to choose 12 grants from the northwest corner of the country. We want them geographically distributed. I have the same question. We cover all of Porter County, Indiana. We have 2 cities and the rest are smaller towns. Are we able to apply for those towns? And did you say if we did the planning, had to take had to physically take place there.
Yes. Yes, I mean, if in fact your project is going to impact a part of your jurisdiction, then the people living in that jurisdiction, including organizations that serve the people in that jurisdiction, are the critical players to be involved in it. So, yes.
Okay, I think we have a couple hands up. I'm gonna jump to those. Carrie, you wanna help with that?
Sure. So Carrie, I have, you will have to unmute yourself, but you should be able to unmute and ask your question. So Carrie, you'll need to unmute to ask your question.
I'm not sure, Carrie Diamond, but I think you might be able to unmute. Is that?
No, I think
I
she's
think
done
that
it,
was
Carrie.
by-
Oh, okay.
by
Oh, there we
accident.
go. There we
Sorry,
go.
I think that was by accident. I did not mean to.
You don't
Oh,
have your
hand-
hand up? You don't have a question?
Unless there's another carry on.
Nope, nope. Okay, well, we'll go to Garrick Scott. And you will just need to unmute in order to ask your question.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
We can hear you.
All right. So I have two questions. One, the PowerPoint that you all were using this afternoon, is that going to be available to us? Because I am blind and I was unable to adhere any information.
Yes, Garrick, it will be posted on our website, and I apologize that you
Wait.
weren't able to see it.
So, and number two, the portal program that you said that would be used for us to upload our information and also to use even indicate that we want to apply for the grant, is that accessible?
Yes, it should be.
Uh-oh.
You should be able to use it with your screen reader.
Okay,
Please let us know if you run into any difficulty with that.
absolutely. And when you say let us know, how use the NDT, I'm not good with acronyms. Use that email address.
Yes,
The NADTA, I think it was.
NADTC.
Yeah,
And-
yeah, they.
Yeah, and or you can use the toll-free number that we have posted on our website. So either way, let us know if you
Yes,
have
ma'am.
difficulty.
Thank you.
We have one more hand up right now, Deanna. So you'll just have to unmute yourself to ask your question.
I'm sorry, I accidentally pushed that button.
Okay, we have no more hands up at this time. Thanks.
Thanks, Carrie. Okay, well, I'm going to move on then through the written ones. It says the duration of the grant is 9 months, but you mentioned a 9-month planning activities after awarded. Are you referring to the entire duration of the grant since it's a planning grant? Is there an extension of funds and duration to then implement plans later? So the 9 months is the planning, how much time you would have to plan. And if there are funds available, we would be hopefully allowing people to apply then for an implementation phase, which would be after the 9 months.
That's correct. And the implementation would only be available to those organizations that have been our planning grantees.
Very good. Okay, do we need to go through a competitive bidding process to select consultants for our transportation planning project under the grant?
I'll try to answer that.
Thank you.
The way that we have usually worked with grants that are using a consultant for some portion of the grant activity is that their procurement process within their organization can operate. So if in fact you're talking about spending a small amount of money, and we're assuming you're certainly not spending $35,000 on this. So it's up to you, up to your organization to govern whether or not you have to do a competitive bidding process, or whether you can select an organization that you've got an ongoing relationship with. This is, we do largely leave that up to the local agency. Carrie, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I would just add, please note that this is a 9-month grant, and we know how if you do have to do a competitive bidding process, that can take some time. So if you are looking to do that, you will need to ensure that you have a plan in place so that you are able to procure that in a timely manner and still have time to do your plan.
A good reminder, Carrie, and just point out, it's probably a good idea for you to be thinking about who and how you would obtain a consultant while you're pulling together your application.
Very good, thanks. Is there any way to know who in my community is the 5310 funded entity? I think I would direct you to your state Department of Transportation for that. All right. If we are currently a 5310 and are developing a comprehensive plan, coordinating with our current committed partners and submit an application, will we need to proceed with our plans? We will need to proceed with our plans while waiting for an award. If we have moved forward while waiting, how will that affect this grant? Virginia, I'm going to have you answer that.
Yeah, I suggest you think about that right now, because there are going to be some differentiations between what you use 5310 funding for and what you use our grant funds for. So I think there's likely to be some crossover in activities. And that's something that if we were to award you as one of our grantees, we would be working with you very carefully about. But I think it is very important, since that is your situation. And there's the opportunity to build on an even maybe possibly more extensive planning process through the 5310 program. It really depends. I mean, the 5310 planning may actually be focused on bringing a mobility manager to your community, for example. And this particular planning process might also be looking at, say, adding a particular service that would supplement the services that are available. So it's really important for you as the applicant to think through, recognizing that things are uncertain. We cannot promise you that we'll award a grant to you. Time moves on and circumstances can change. But I urge you to give it some serious consideration. It's a great opportunity.
Thanks, Virginia. What's the phone number? I'm going to say it. It's 866-983-3222, and that is our technical assistance line. And you would go ahead and call that, and they will connect you with one of us who can answer your question. That number is on our website and also on our frequently asked question page, so you should be able to find that. And this actually does remind me, as we're getting through all these questions, if we don't get through them all, we will definitely get them answered. There will be a follow-up email going out after sometime in the next few days with all of the questions and the answers. So just want to make sure everyone knows that. Several counties could be considered in this project, ? Yes, you'll have an opportunity to define your community, the region, the area that you're going to be focusing on in the application. We already have a coordinated transportation plan for our county, and we have been 5310 recipients for several years. We are far beyond initial planning. This keeps popping around. However, rural area with a large aging population. Do you feel our agency would even be considered, or are they looking for infancy programs?
No, we're not necessarily looking for infancy programs, but we certainly will probably fund some. So I'd say it's really important that you include some description about how this particular planning process is going to be different, how it's going to add to or build upon already existing programs and plans that exist in your community. community. So it does need to be something that's going to move forward, not just maintain what you've already been able to accomplish.
And I'll add to this. This is Carrie. It's great that you have the coordinated transportation plan. Within that, you've probably identified where you want to go, maybe an innovative service or a change in your service. And as you're planning for some of those goals within your transportation, your coordinated transportation plan, you can be calling in older adults, people with disabilities, and work that into the planning for just that one piece of where you're going with your transportation plan.
Is this grant able to be used as match funding for 5310 funded programs? No. That one's nice and quick. We are a nonprofit providing transportation, but under 5311. But we do serve seniors and the disabled. Are we eligible? And if this is a planning grant, do you play a role in funding the execution of the grant? I'll answer the second part in that, as mentioned before, if there's funds available, there will be an opportunity for the awarded grantees to apply for an implementation grant. The first part about the 5310 or 5311, are we eligible? I would say yes. Next question, can the application cover a region? Oh, I'm sorry, maybe I didn't, but it's the same answer. Can the application cover a region if the total population for a multiple communities locations remains under 50,000? And yes, and again, you'll have an opportunity to define your area in the application. Could a successful multi-sector partnership include area employers as well as community partners that serve the elderly and disabled? Yes, that would be lovely. I think we have a hand up. Carrie, do you want to?
Sure. Garrick, you had your hand up again. You would have to unmute yourself to ask the question. It looks like you're unmuted if you'd like to ask.
I apologize for constantly raising my hand, but I can't listen to the chat and type it and still hear what you all say at the same time. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
So I have two questions. One, on the website, will it show what the criteria is for determining a rural area? I feel like all our counties are rural, and one man's rural may be another man's suburb, but we are also in the city where we have a major university, and I just didn't know if that population would play a part in whether or not one of our counties would be considered rural.
What, the fact that there's a university there?
Yes.
I don't think so. I mean, I think as long as you define how you are a rural community, that how the target of this planning grant is a rural community, and that meets the 50,000 criteria, then it's acceptable. I realize that having a major university means that the population comes and goes in your area. But I'm assuming that, you know, even if part of the beneficiaries of this project would be university students who are themselves people with disabilities, it would, I don't think that would be prohibitively, that would prohibit you from applying as a rural jurisdiction.
Yeah, they wouldn't even be 2% of the population we serve at the university. Wouldn't be 2%. So I think that's safe. And so my second question and my last question is, so I noticed, well, I heard you say before that you didn't want people using paid services. I'm assuming that was like Lyft and Uber and things of that nature.
No.
But if we have our own forms of transportation that we use to provide the transportation, that sort of thing is okay, correct?
So a couple of clarifying points. One, this is a planning grant, so the particular choices of transportation that exist in your community are relevant, but we're not going to be supporting rides, except as Jane pointed out in her presentation, to help people get back and forth to advisory committee meetings, for example, or a community meeting. But if, in fact, in talking through your planning process, the issue comes up about whether you want to use a service such as Uber and Lyft, that's perfectly acceptable in terms of the plan for increasing the availability of accessible transportation for older adults and people with disabilities in the area that's served, that is affected by the plan. So, and you may have a partner in the planning process who is themselves a for-profit organization.
Thanks
They
for the
might be
question.
the applicant.
Yep. Thanks for the question, Garrick. Jane, do you want to wrap up because we're at time?
Yeah, I see it. It's 3 o'clock. We do have a handful of questions left in the chat. And as I said before, we will be writing the answers to those questions, and we'll be compiling all of the questions that have been asked and answered into a document, and we'll get it out in an email as well as getting it posted on our website. And as stated, this the PowerPoint presentation as well as a recording of our webinar today is all going to be on our website. So nadtc.org can go there to get follow-up from all of this. And if you have other questions, you can use the email or the phone number. So I thank you all for attending today, and we look forward to reading the application.